Hello to everyone listening today. My name is Evelyn Thompson, and I'm here to tell a story that perhaps not every mother would have the courage to face, but it is an essential part of my life. This is a story about $250,000, about 30 years of silence, and about the true cost of a sacrifice that was never appreciated. On that fateful day, the air in my dining room suddenly became so heavy it was hard to breathe. I had just placed an old savings passbook on the table. It was faded with age, a testament to decades of my own sweat and tears. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had once hoped would be my comfort and support, in my old age, suddenly began to choke back sobs. $250,000? And you're saying that's not enough? I asked. Fine. Then I'll tell the whole family. I'll tell you all why I never gave you a single penny for the last 30 years. My voice wasn't loud, but the words landed like a clap of thunder, silencing the entire room. My son, my grandson, and my daughter-in-law all looked up at me, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. The space was filled with a thick, uncomfortable quiet, broken only by the sound of my daughter-in-law's weeping. But I knew her tears were not born from emotion or gratitude. No, she was crying because she felt the inheritance she was getting for taking care of me these past few years was far too small. She was crying from disappointment and from an insatiable greed that could never be satisfied. The whole family sat there, frozen in silence. No one dared to say a word. All of their eyes were fixed on me, searching, questioning. I stood up, pushing my wooden chair back with a loud scrape that echoed in the still room. My voice remained steady, with no hint of irritation or sharpness. But my eyes were another story. My eyes were as cold as the winter snows of Chicago in 1984, the year it all began, the year my life was sent down a different path, and the year I started my life as an invisible person in my own home. In that moment, I knew. This was the time. It was the time for me to finally speak up, to turn the pages of a life that had been hidden away for 3 long decades. I didn't want to hide anymore. I wanted them to know the truth, to understand the price of my silence and the cost of a sacrifice they never even saw. It was time for the story of Evelyn Thompson to be told. It all began on a spring afternoon, the kind where the dogwood branches were just starting to show their blossoms, heralding a new beginning. For me, it was a beginning too, but one steeped in bitterness. I had gathered all my courage and placed a savings passbook, its cover faded by the passage of time, right in the center of our family's dinner table. I had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in my mind more times than I could count. Seated around that table were the people I had dedicated my life to, my son, Michael, whom I had loved and sacrificed for, my daughter-in-law, Susan, a woman I had once hoped would be like a daughter to me, and my grandson, Jason, whom I adored with all my heart. I wanted to do this with all of them present, openly and transparently. I set the passbook on the table, took a deep, steadying breath, and spoke. I tried my best to keep my voice even and calm. This is the savings I want to give to you now, I said. I don't want you to have to wait for me to pass away and read a will. My intention was to distribute this money while I was still alive, to see my children benefit from it, so they wouldn't have to wait for my death. I thought of it as a gift, a heartfelt sharing from a mother's soul. The family exchanged glances. My son Michael's eyes immediately lit up, a wide, joyful smile spreading across his face. He was likely imagining a windfall, a substantial sum that would change his life. But my daughter-in-law Susan was different. Her brow furrowed instantly, her eyes turning sharp and probing, tinged with a clear look of displeasure. Then, she spoke a single sentence that felt like a bucket of ice water thrown in my face, shattering all my hopes and expectations for this moment. Is that it? Just $250,000? She asked, her voice dripping with disdain. If we sold this house, we could get close to $1 million, couldn't we? My heart seized in my chest. Just $250,000? Her words were not a question. They were an insult. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that $250,000 was far too little compensation for the trouble of caring for me. She was putting a price tag on her efforts and felt she was being cheated. I said nothing in response. I simply reached for the teapot and quietly poured myself another cup. My hands trembled slightly, but I fought to keep my expression from betraying any emotion. A cold smile touched my lips, a bitter, hollow thing full of scorn for my own foolish naivety. A murmur started around the table. My son, Michael, began whispering something to his wife. And then, my grandson, Jason, the boy I loved so dearly, chimed in with a question so innocent it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Grandma," he asked, looking at me with wide, curious eyes, "why won't you give Mom and Dad more money?" That question, asked without a trace of malice, painfully illuminated all the years I had spent living in my own home as if I were invisible. In that instant, I finally understood. To them, I was not a person, not a mother or a grandmother. I was merely a financial resource, a burden that needed to be managed until my assets could be claimed. They had never once seen my silent sacrifices. They had never once felt the boundless love I had poured into their lives. In that moment, I felt like a forgotten doll stored in an attic, a person without a voice, a mere shadow flitting through the halls of my own house. A wave of humiliation and searing pain washed over me. But I did not cry. I couldn't. I had already cried more than enough tears over the past 30 years. Now, all I wanted was for the truth to finally come out. I wanted them to understand the true cost of my silence, to face the price of their indifference. The gift I had so carefully prepared, the offering from my heart, had been thrown back in my face as an insult. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the time had come to reveal everything. When Susan's insult and Jason's innocent question echoed through the room, I felt an invisible wall inside my heart. A wall I had been building for 30 years, finally crumble into dust. 30 years. For 3 long decades I had lived like a shadow in my own home, a silent observer of my own life. Now, the time had come for me to find my voice. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small, worn notebook. This notebook had been my constant companion through all those long, silent years. It wasn't a diary filled with reflections on joy and sorrow. It was a ledger, a record of every slight, every cruel action, every cutting word that had chipped away at my spirit, reminding me of how I was truly seen in this house. I opened it, the pages yellowed and soft with age. And then, I began to speak. I read from it, entry by entry, in painstaking detail. My voice was still calm, measured. I didn't raise it. I didn't scream or cry. There was no hatred on my face, no venom in my tone. But every word I spoke was like a shard of ice, cutting through the heavy air of the dining room and plunging it into a chilling, suffocating silence. I told them about the day Susan had accidentally thrown away the bowl I was eating from. It was just so old and chipped, she had said. That was her excuse. I remember it so clearly. It was early in the morning, and I was eating my oatmeal. She walked past, and with a deliberate flick of her hand, knocked the bowl right off the table. It shattered into 100 pieces on the floor. She just offered a thin smile and a careless apology, as if it were a minor mishap. But to me, it was an act of profound disrespect, an insult that went bone deep. I told them about the day I was locked in the backyard shed. "You keep forgetting to turn off the stove, Mom," Michael had said later. That was his justification for locking the door. But the truth was, I hadn't been cooking at all. I was trapped in that small, dark space, unable to get out, listening to the world go on without me. I remember crying for hours that day. The fear of being isolated, of being imprisoned in my own home, was a cold dread that stayed with me for years. And then, I told them about the dinner, the one I had spent all afternoon preparing, waiting for them to come home so we could eat together at the table, to feel the warmth of family around me, but they never came. They had decided to eat out, leaving me alone without a word. When they finally returned late that night, what they brought back for me was a single hard-boiled egg. One egg. That was all I got from my family's meal. That egg wasn't food to me. It was a symbol of my loneliness, of being forgotten, of a cruelty so casual it was breathtaking. I kept reading from my notebook. I spoke of the days I had to wash my clothes by hand in the frigid garage. During the winter, because Susan told me the washing machine was only for our things, for the younger generation's clothes. I spoke of the times I was sick, burning with fever, and no one came to check on me, no one brought me a glass of water. I was left utterly alone. I told them about the sleepless nights I'd spent in my small room, listening to the sounds of their laughter and joy drifting from the living room, while I sat in silence, consumed by a profound and aching loneliness. I had recorded all of this, secretly, for 30 years, while living beside them like a ghost. I never uttered a single word of complaint, never a word of accusation. I just wrote it down. It was my silent chronicle of pain. Every word in that notebook was a scar on my heart. In the dead quiet of the room, the only sounds were my steady voice and the ragged, heavy breathing of my daughter-in-law, Susan. My son, Michael, had his head bowed, his face ashen and pale. And Jason, my grandson, just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and incomprehension. I knew then. They had never imagined, not for a single moment, the life I had been living, the things I had endured right under their noses. I had been silent for far too long. Now, with all the secrets laid bare, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The pain was still there, a dull ache deep inside, but I was finally free from the crushing weight of my silence. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. The heavy silence in the dining room remained, thick and suffocating, long after I had finished turning the final sorrowful page in that worn-out notebook. My son, Michael, my daughter-in-law, Susan, and my grandson, Jason, all sat with their heads bowed, refusing to meet my gaze. I could see the shock etched on their faces, the dawning realization of a truth they had never once considered possible. For all these years, they had seen me as nothing more than a frail, helpless old woman, a burden who depended entirely on them for protection and survival. I took a long, deep breath, letting it fill my lungs before I continued. My voice was still quiet, still even, but now it was filled with an unshakable resolve. Each word I spoke felt like a declaration, a chipping away at the foundation of lies our family had been built upon. Everyone in this family believed that Michael was the one taking care of me. I began, looking directly at Susan. She flinched, her eyes darting away, unable to hold my stare. "But the truth," I said, letting the words hang in the air for a moment, "is that ever since I turned 45, I have been secretly working the night shift at a convenience store." That sentence landed in the dining room like a bomb. Michael's head shot up, his eyes wide with utter astonishment. 45 years old. The age when most people start to think about slowing down, about planning for a comfortable retirement. That was when I had begun a completely new life. A secret life that not a single person in my own family knew anything about. During the day, I was the picture of a conventional homemaker. I took care of the house, I cooked the meals, and I fulfilled all the duties of a mother and a wife for my family. But when night fell, after everyone else was sound asleep, I would slip out of the house as quiet as a mouse. I would change into the simple uniform of the convenience store and spend my nights standing behind a cash register, earning a meager wage. I remember the exact amount with perfect clarity. It was $8.50 an hour. For 20 years, I lived two completely separate, parallel lives. One was the life of Evelyn Thompson, the gentle, dutiful homemaker who existed within the walls of this house. The other was the life of a silent, anonymous cashier, a woman who worked tirelessly in the dead of night. I never dared to spend any of the money I earned. I couldn't allow myself to get sick, and I certainly could not allow myself to speak of it. Every single dollar I made went directly into savings. I couldn't buy myself a new sweater or even a small treat. I lived in constant fear of falling ill, because I knew that if I got sick, I wouldn't be able to go to work, and my secret would be exposed. And I couldn't complain, not a single word. I didn't want anyone in my family to find out about my secret job. I was terrified that if they knew, they would force me to stop, and in doing so, They would steal away my last and only chance to ever reclaim my voice. I had two old friends from my younger days, two people I could trust implicitly, who always supported me. One of them, a dear friend from high school, had gotten into small-scale investing, and the other worked as an insurance agent. They became my secret advisors. They taught me how to save effectively, how to manage my money so that it would grow, slowly but surely. I didn't want to keep the cash in the house. I was too afraid they would find it. So, with my friend's help, I opened a separate bank account, one that no one in my family knew existed. For 2 decades, I kept saving, penny by penny, dollar by dollar. Every bill in that account was soaked in my sweat, my tears, and my silent sacrifice. When all was said and done, I had managed to save exactly $250,000. It was the total sum of a lifetime of hard work, the fruit of a secret life filled with hardship and loneliness. I glanced down at the savings passbook still lying on the table. That money, it was never about trying to buy back my family's affection. I knew that the bonds of family are priceless, something that money could never purchase. No, that money was to buy back something else. It was to buy back the voice of a mother they had learned to ignore, the voice of a woman they saw as a worthless burden. I wanted to use this money to prove to them, once and for all, that I was not useless, that I was not a weight dragging them down. I wanted to show them that I had value, that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet, and that I had earned the right to be heard. That $250,000 wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. It was a symbol of my unbreakable spirit and my unwavering will, and I knew, right then and there, that the time had finally come to use that money in my own way, in a way they could never, ever have imagined. Even after I had finished telling the story of my 20 years of hidden labor and secret savings, the air in the dining room was still thick with silence. My son, Michael, was looking at me with eyes full of a new, dawning horror and regret. My daughter-in-law, Susan, had gone pale, so pale she looked ill, and she could no longer bring herself to look at me directly. My grandson, Jason, just stared, his eyes wide as if he was slowly, painfully, putting the pieces of the truth together. I took a deep breath, and then I continued. My voice was still gentle, but it was filled with a firm resolve, as if every single word was its own declaration. This money, I said, looking around the table, will be divided into 3 parts. Hearing this, a stir went through my family once again. A flicker of joy crossed Michael's face. I could see him thinking that he was sure to receive the largest share. Susan too looked up at me, a faint, desperate hope dawning in her eyes. She still thought this could turn in her favor. I went on slowly, letting each of my words land on them like a heavy stone. The first part, I said, will go to the community daycare center down the street, the place where I used to volunteer. That daycare center was a place where I had spent so many of my afternoons, playing with the children, reading them stories, and helping them with their little art projects. I loved those children. They gave me a sense of joy and warmth that I could never seem to find inside the walls of my own home. Their laughter was a balm to my lonely soul. I wanted my money to be used for their care, to buy them new books and better toys, to give them a richer and happier childhood than they might have had otherwise. The second part, I continued, will go to my dearest friend, the one who kept me from being put in a nursing home. This friend was one of the 2 people who had helped me manage my secret finances all these years. She was always there to listen to me, to offer a shoulder to cry on, and to encourage me during my most difficult moments. When Michael and Susan tried to have me moved into a home, saying my health was failing and I needed special care, it was my friend who stood up for me. She came over, spoke to them plainly, and made it clear that I was perfectly capable of living on my own. I was so deeply grateful to her, and I wanted to give a part of what I had earned to the person who had always stood by my side. And then, for the final part, I looked straight at my son and my daughter-in-law. My eyes were sharp now, and as cold as a winter morning. And the last part, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, will go to the child who never once asked me, "Mom, do you have any money?" The entire family was stunned, utterly and completely floored. Susan suddenly burst into tears, a loud, unreasonable wail. "How can you be so unfair?" she shrieked, her voice thick with outrage and greed. "We've taken care of you for years. How can you give our money to your friends and to strangers?" She still believed that her version of care was worth an enormous fortune. She still hadn't grasped the simple truth that you cannot put a price on. Genuine affection, that for me, her care had felt like nothing more than a grudging obligation, an investment she was waiting to cash in. I answered her quietly, "Bye!" My voice was still calm, but it carried an undeniable weight that silenced her shrieking. Taking care of someone out of a sense of duty is a world away from taking care of someone out of love. I am only sharing my life's work with the people who understand the true price of silence. Every word I spoke was like a knife, aimed straight at their hearts. Yes, they had cared for me, but not from a place of love. They had cared for me because they saw me as a financial asset, a resource to be managed and eventually exploited. They cared for me because they wanted to ensure they would receive a larger inheritance. They had never once understood the pain I had to endure in silence for 3 long decades. They had no idea that my silence had cost me far, far more than they could ever imagine. Susan stopped crying. Her face was ashen and she was speechless. My son, Michael, buried his face in his hands, and I could see his entire body trembling with shame. My grandson, Jason, just stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and, perhaps, a glimmer of understanding and embarrassment for his parents. They had never dreamed that I would do something like this, that I could make a decision so bold and resolute. They had never imagined that the quiet, old mother they had always dismissed and looked down on could possess such a powerful voice. My plan for dividing my savings wasn't just about distributing money. It was a declaration of my independence, an assertion of my own self-worth, and a very, very expensive lesson that I intended for my entire family to learn. After I announced my plan for the savings and finally told the truth about my 30 years of silence, the atmosphere in my family home became thick with an unbearable tension. My daughter-in-law Susan had dissolved into a fit of weeping and shrieking, while my son Michael sat completely silent, his face buried in his hands. My grandson Jason just looked at me with eyes full of confusion and, I think, a deep sense of shame for his parents. I had assumed that my story, as painful as it was, would remain within the 4 walls of our house, a private reckoning for our family to finally face. But life, as it so often does, had a very different plan in store for me. It turned out that a neighbor, who was at a small community block party that morning, had happened to be recording a video of the gathering and had captured my entire speech by pure chance. I had no idea he was filming, and it never once crossed my mind that my private family moment would become a public spectacle. He posted the video on social media with a title that was designed to grab attention. Grandma uses 30 years of secret savings to teach her greedy daughter-in-law a lesson. I don't know exactly when he posted it, but in just 3 days, it had reached 4 million views. It was a number so immense, I could barely comprehend it. I'm not very active on social media myself, but I started to feel the change in the way people in the neighborhood looked at me. Strangers would stop me on the street or even come to my door, offering words of admiration and sympathy. Beneath the video, thousands, then tens of thousands, of comments began to pour in. I couldn't possibly read them all, but my friends and even a few local lawyers who reached out to me would tell me what people were saying. The vast majority of the comments were overwhelmingly supportive of me and filled with indignation toward Michael and Susan. This grandma is an absolute legend. Money can't buy you class, and it certainly can't buy you morals. That daughter-in-law should be ashamed of herself. For me, these comments were more than just simple support. They were a form of validation. They were a validation of everything I had endured, an acknowledgement of my quiet resilience. I suddenly realized that I wasn't alone anymore. I learned that there were countless other people out there, living in similar situations, suffering in silence. My story had touched a nerve and given voice to their own hidden pain. The incident created a significant ripple effect in public opinion. Soon, local newspapers and even television stations started calling, asking me for interviews. I agreed to a few of them. I wanted my story to be heard by a wider audience, not for my own sake, but to sound an alarm about a serious social issue. The way elderly people are so often mistreated and exploited by their own relatives. And as for Susan and Michael, their lives were completely turned upside down. Susan couldn't handle the endless stream of criticism and outright condemnation she received online, and she was forced to delete all of her social media accounts. Michael had to take several days off from work because of the constant whispers and gossip from his colleagues. In the court of public opinion, their reputations had been utterly and irrevocably destroyed. I took no pleasure in seeing this happen to them. I felt no joy in their public humiliation, but I knew, deep down, that this was the price they had to pay. It was the price for their greed, their selfishness, and their profound disrespect. They were simply reaping what they had sown for 3 long decades. My story had become a cautionary tale for everyone who saw it, a stark warning, especially to children and grandchildren, that family bonds are not something to be leveraged or sold, and that morality is something money can never, ever buy. As I looked out my window, the morning light was just beginning to stream in, painting the room in soft, golden hues. A strange and profound sense of peace settled over me. I had finally raised my voice, and my voice had been heard. I was no longer a shadow, flitting silently through the halls of my own home. I had found my freedom. The freedom I had been searching for 30 long years. After everything that had happened, I finally found a measure of peace for my own heart. I no longer lived in that old house. It was a place that held far too many sorrowful memories, the place where I had lived like a shadow for 30 long years. I wanted to start a new life, a life that was truly free and serene. I decided to move into a small apartment near the ocean. The air here is clean, and the salty breeze feels wonderful against my skin. Every morning, I watch the sunrise sparkle across the surface of the water, and it fills me with hope and energy for the new day. At night, I lie in bed and listen to the whisper of the waves. It's as if their gentle, rhythmic sound coaxes me into a peaceful sleep, washing away any lingering sadness. This was the life I had always dreamed of, a life untangled from the worries and anxieties of the past, a life where I could finally just be myself. With the savings I had left, I began to write a book. It was an unexpected turn of events, something I had never imagined myself doing, but it brought me a brand new passion. I wanted to tell my story, not just to release the thoughts and feelings I had held deep in my heart for so long, but also to share the lessons I had learned along the way. My first book was titled The Sound of a Bowl and Spoon, a memoir of an invisible mother. The title was meant to evoke those lonely meals, the indifference and the pain that were hidden in such a familiar, everyday sound. I poured so much time and passion into that book. I carefully recreated the details, the emotions, and the thoughts of the 30 years I had lived in silence. Writing it wasn't just a task, it was a kind of therapy, a way to finally heal my emotional wounds, one word at a time. To my complete astonishment, my book became a bestseller, landing in the top 10 for the year. I couldn't believe it. I was just an older mother, a completely ordinary woman. But my story had touched the hearts of so many people. I started receiving invitations to speak at events and to meet with my readers at book signings. And the most special thing of all was that people no longer referred to me as just Evelyn Thompson, the 65-year-old woman from the viral video. Instead, they began to call me Evelyn. It was a title spoken with respect, the kind you would give to a teacher, to someone who shares their knowledge and experience. I was so deeply moved and so proud. I had not only found my voice again, but I was also being recognized by society as a useful person, someone who could inspire others. At 65, my life had opened a new door, a door to freedom, peace of mind, and new opportunities. I realized that at any age, you can find joy and meaning in life. I never felt lonely anymore. I had new friends, beloved readers, and people who were always there to listen to my story and cheer me on. I know the road ahead is still long, but I'm not afraid at all. I have overcome the greatest hardship of my life, and I believe I will continue to live a full and meaningful existence. The door to freedom opened slowly, and I stepped through it, beginning a new journey. A journey of peace and happiness. And with that, to everyone listening, my story for today comes to an end. I have been on this earth for 65 years now, and it took me 30 of those years to learn one single thing. It was, without a doubt, the most expensive lesson of my entire life. And that lesson is this: family bonds, once they have been turned into a bargaining chip, can never be repaired. No matter how much money you offer, no matter how much you try to give, you can never, ever buy back a person's heart. I don't hold a grudge against my son or my daughter-in-law. I truly don't. The anger and the hatred are gone now. More than anything, I feel a profound sense of peace, a deep relief that I was finally able to free myself from the crushing burden of the past. My love for my children and the sacrifices I made for them were real. They were genuine. But I came to understand that when those feelings are taken advantage of, when a price tag is put on them, they lose the sacred meaning they were meant to have. You can buy many things with money, it's true, but you can never buy back a person's heart, their respect, their gratitude, or their genuine affection. I only hope that future generations will not force their parents to use a savings passbook just to have their final say. Please, do not allow them to suffer in silence, to live like shadows in their own homes. Cherish the bonds of your family, and be grateful for the care and upbringing your parents gave you. Because once a wound or a crack forms in the heart, some things can never truly be healed. Time might fade the scar, but it can never erase the painful memories. If your parents are still with you, please give them your time. Truly listen to what they have to say. Sometimes, a simple question, a single word of heartfelt concern, can warm their hearts more than any expensive material gift ever could. Ask them a simple question. Mom, are you tired today? Who knows? Those few simple words, they might just be worth more than $200,000. To everyone who has listened to my story, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your willingness to hear me has been a tremendous source of encouragement. I hope we can meet again for the next story. Perhaps I'll share more about my new life. Or maybe it will be the story of another mother who has found the courage to speak up